Hi folks, I'm Dan Dworkis and this is the Emergency Mind Project. In this series of 3 critical concepts videos, we're going to be looking at 3 key structures that teams use to perform in times of crisis and emergency. Now, understanding these structures, understanding how to use them, understanding their strengths and weaknesses are going to be absolutely key to being able to apply knowledge under pressure, no matter what type of an organization you're working in. In this video, we're going to be thinking about swarm teams. Now, I'm a little biased, but swarm teams are my favorite type of team. I think they're incredibly powerful, but they're also pretty complicated and there's a lot of challenges with how to use them well. So this is really a rich set of things to explore. Let's jump into it. To start, imagine you have a group of individuals as part of your organization who are doing some sort of a task. Now, these individuals are off doing their normal thing. That could be another crisis task, that could be a run-of-the-mill task, a non-crisis task, whatever it is. They're just doing their normal stuff. Then, all of a sudden, there's some sort of an emergency. Now, as that happens, some percent of these individuals move from a dormant state to an active state. They're called upon to respond. They assemble where and when they're needed at the point of the crisis. They work with each other some way. They negotiate those relationships. They apply their skills, and they work together to solve that problem. When the problem is solved, they dissolve. They go back to where they were before, and in most cases, they go from an active state back to a dormant state, back to their normal jobs, right? So that's a life cycle of what it is to have a swarm team. You go from a steady state, you are activated, you assemble on a problem set, you solve the problem, and then you go back to wherever you were doing before. Right? So in medicine, we often see this as an example of what happens in a cardiac arrest or what's called a code blue situation. Right? Things are humming along as they normally should. Somebody all of a sudden has some sort of a medical emergency, say a cardiac arrest. We hit the code blue alarm. That summons a swarm team to that point in space and time. Right? People are activated. They assemble on that problem set for that patient. They do everything they can to solve the problem for that patient. And when the case is over, they return back to their normal universes. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in that moment. So let's zoom in for a moment at the point of swarming. Right? So these are individuals that have come from somewhere else. They've assembled on a problem set, and all of a sudden they have to work together in order to solve this problem. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in that moment. There's introductions, there's figuring out who has what skill set, what type of a protocol they're going to run, what type of a problem set they're facing, and how they're going to solve it. There's the initiation of a plan and of moving together to try to solve that problem set. So much richness in there. We're going to do a ton of videos deep diving into the moment of swarming and how to make that happen. But first, let's look for a second at the strengths and weaknesses of swarm teams. Okay, the strength of a swarm team, one of them at least, is that you don't have to have resources active all the time. You can have resources in a dormant state, and they can respond where and when they're needed at any point in the sort of range that you cover. Now, this is an pretty elegant solution to a supply-demand mismatch equation. If you don't have the resources to always have an active team, you can assemble that team only where and when it's needed. They're also able to respond to emergencies in lots of different locations, either physically or temporally, right? You can imagine how hard it would be to ask an operating room team, a surgical team, to run an operation in a hallway, to run an operation in the cafeteria. They're just not set up for it like that. Swarm teams, though, no problem. You want to run a swarm team in a cafeteria? You got it. You want to run a swarm team in a patient's room? You got it, Chief. Whatever you need, we can assemble where and when we're needed to get the job done. All right, the weaknesses or the challenges of what it takes to run a swarm team, there's a lot of them. To start with, in the moment of actual swarming, it's completely possible that the individuals who are activated and come together to solve this problem might not know each other. They might have never worked together before, right? They don't have a shared history, a shared language, a shared set of rituals a lot of the time. If you go back to the video about intact teams, you see that one of the huge strengths of intact teams is that they're able to predict how the other members of the team are able to operate. Typically speaking, swarm teams don't have that, right? So they have to negotiate 2 problem sets at the same time, one of which is the problem set they're called upon to assemble and fix, and the other is the problem set of how to create a team on the fly at the same time. Okay, when we leave the moment of swarming, when we leave the moment of assembly, we also have a pretty interesting challenge, which is what happens to these folks when they go back to their normal jobs. So on an individual level, if you were just part of a swarm team, you might have just been through a pretty significant experience. You might have questions, you might have feelings or emotions about what happened, but when you go back to your normal universe, the other folks that are around you, they didn't just live through that. They have a different set of experiences. So there's a re-entry phenomenon. There's also a possibility of losing learning, right? When you were swarming, you solved a problem set in a really interesting way. How do you carry that learning back to the team that you were a part of, right? We think about that often. You can call that creative exhaust, right? This is the learning that happens as a byproduct of us trying to solve problems, and it's really easy to lose that creative exhaust. Okay, so what's your challenge? How do you take this knowledge about swarm teams and use it to move forward and help you and your organization perform better in times of crisis and emergency? I'll admit I had trouble picking just one challenge here, so I settled on two. So first, if you were in a swarm team, if you're somebody who's likely to be activated to be part of a swarm team, your challenge is what can you personally do to set up for success in swarming? Right? What that means is how do you prepare to perform as part of a swarm team? What types of situations might you be called upon to activate? How can you study those situations ahead of time? And how can you set yourself up for success? Now, if you're not somebody who's likely to be part of a swarm team, the question's flipped. How can you learn from a returning swarmer? Right? How do you help them re-enter their normal job well? And how can you help them capture that creative exhaust? And there's a lot more challenges to this, and you can look forward to a lot more videos around how to effectively and efficiently run swarm teams in times of crisis and emergency. But there you have it, a brief deep dive into how swarm teams work. Now, if you want to get more involved in the Emergency Mind project community, we would love to have you. There are so many ways to become part of the team. The easiest one is to head to emergencymind.com. You can head to the upper right corner and take the crisis skills test there. It's free, it's fun, and it's a great way to get involved. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was helpful.